Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Indeed webinar on strengthening evidence-based practice with the Indeed repository of studies on risk and protective factors. We're very glad to welcome everyone who's joining us today. We hope that this will be both an exciting, stimulating, and a practically useful webinar to support you in your work in the field. My name is Kai Brand Jacobson. I am the facilitator of the webinar series, and I will start by sharing with you now the presentation which we'll be using for today's event. For today's program, we will have a presentation of the repository by Stefan Kloss of the Friedensuniversiteit in Brussels. Stefan was the lead within the Indeed project working to develop the repository and will provide us with a presentation and how it can be used for the field. We then have a panel discussion on how the repository can strengthen evidence-based evaluation, evidence-based initiative design, and evidence-based policing, where we're joined by Teresa Silva from Mid-Sweden University, who will speak on evidence-based evaluation. Marzena Kordajuk-Was from the Polish Platform for Homeland Security, who will speak on evidence-based initiative design, and then Vasilos Theophilopoulos from the Hellenic Police, who will speak on evidence-based policing. After we have the presentations, we'll have a session for questions and answers, and then a final part of the webinar where we will share with you information on upcoming events in Indeed, future webinars, a series of cascade trainings, a policy seminar, which will take place in June, and then the final Indeed Forum of 2024, which will be held in September. We look forward to sharing more information on these upcoming events together with you. For those for whom this is your first time participating in an Indeed event, we warmly welcome you, and also would like to just take the opportunity to share with everyone briefly. Indeed is a project supported by the European Commission, made up of more than 19 partners from across 15 countries in the European Union, as well as 3 advisory boards. The focus of the Indeed project is on supporting an evidence-based approach to designing and evaluating, preventing and countering violent extremism initiatives. The project has included an extensive review process, looking at and learning from what is being done in the field, existing approaches to evaluation, but also looking at other fields, from social services to policing, medicine, and more, to learn from these areas and draw into the PCVE field to improve the practice and use of evidence-based evaluation and evidence-based design of initiatives, including both projects, programs, ad hoc initiatives, and policies from local to national strategies. You can find out more information about the Indeed project on our website and by subscribing to the Indeed newsletter. But to not take away any more time from the event, I would like to welcome Stefan Kloss, who will now share with us on the Indeed repository, its background, its purpose, and key functions. Stefan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kai, and good morning, everyone. So I'm going to use the next 15 minutes or so to introduce you to our repository of studies on risk and protective factors, and I want to explain to you its purpose and its key functions. But before I get to the repository, I want to first take a moment to say a few words about the concept of evidence-based practice. As Kai just mentioned, strengthening evidence-based practice in PCVE is the key objective of Indeed. So what does evidence-based practice mean? For us, very concretely, evidence-based practice refers to a decision-making process which draws on and integrates 3 things. The first is best available evidence. The second is professional expertise. And the third is the careful consideration of community values, preferences, and circumstances. So evidence-based PCVE for us means that key decisions, for instance, about the design of a new initiative to prevent violent extremism should be informed by the best available studies and knowledge in the field, by professional expertise and experience, and by a thorough understanding of the community in which an initiative is implemented. And our assumption is that by applying that logic of evidence-based practice to PCVE, we can develop more efficient and legitimate initiatives, and we can also improve the process of evaluating existing initiatives. And we'll come to that point later on in our panel. Now, in order to advance evidence-based practice in PCVE, we ideally need a strong evidence base to build on. And there is some good news here. Research in the field of PCVE is rapidly growing, and this is partly reflected in a rising number of studies on risk and protective factors. You can see here the graph to the right, which shows an almost exponential growth in studies on risk and protective factors during the 2010s. So on the one hand, that increase in studies is great. It means that we know a lot more about factors which might facilitate or prevent processes of radicalization and violent extremism. But on the other hand, there are also a number of challenges. The many new studies we have on risk and protective factors are dispersed across many different disciplines. Some studies appear in journals of psychology, others in criminology, again, others in education, social work, sociology, and so on. So getting an overview of what we know about violent extremism is difficult. Additionally, many studies sit behind a paywall and are inaccessible, even for researchers. My own university doesn't have the financial means to subscribe to all relevant journals, for example. So collecting the knowledge we have and getting it to the people who need it, who work in the field of PCVE, is an enormous challenge. And this is where our repository comes in. It aims to address that challenge and enable practitioners in PCVE to access and review the best available evidence on risk and protective factors efficiently. Now, this is what our repository looks like. It is at its most basic a database, which currently includes more than 250 studies. And this database is regularly updated every 6 months. The last update was run in January, and it is available to anyone free of charge on our website. You can see the link here on the slide. Perhaps we can also add it to the chat. And now it's important to stress that the currently available version of our repository is the beta version. We're currently working on a better, more user-friendly version of it. The repository at this moment, for instance, does not yet work very well on a mobile phone. This is something we're looking into. And we also plan to then present the final version of the repository in September. And if you have any thoughts on how we can improve the repository further, including its design and functions, please let us know. We have also prepared a feedback form for you through which we will collect your ideas later on. Okay, so if you scroll down the repository page, you are presented, as you can see here on the slide, with a number of search filters. And these filters should allow you to quickly and efficiently find the studies which you're looking for. You can filter the database on the one hand by broad categories of or individual risk and protective factors. So for instance, if you're interested only in understanding the link between education and violent extremism, then you can go and do a targeted search in our repository for studies which consider education as a potential risk factor or protective factor. You can also search for studies which have looked at specific populations. So if, for instance, you're primarily interested in studies on adolescents or prisoners, then you can filter the database accordingly. If you're interested in a particular ideological strand, you can also use our repository to filter accordingly, for instance, for studies on right-wing extremism. And finally, we have filters which allow you to search for studies by study location, for instance, only studies conducted in Germany or in the United States, and by observed outcome, where you can specify whether you're interested in studies that have looked at violent behavior or violent attitudes. All right. I also want to give you an example and show you a short video of how the repository can be used. So let us assume for a moment that you want to know more about the link between conversion to Islam and violent extremism, perhaps because you're planning or implementing a project which addresses people who are undergoing this process. So let's play the video, see if that works. Excellent. So,
Sorry, Stefan, just to ask you, there we go. We see the video now.
So if that's the case, you can go to the repository website, you can scroll down the page, and now you can see our search filters here. And one way you may look at the link between conversion and violent extremism is by clicking on risk factors. If you do that, a window opens where you can see different categories of risk factors. In this case, we're looking for a risk factor to do with religion. And when we open the category, we can see the risk factor conversion. Now we can select the risk factor, click apply, scroll down the page, and click show studies. The repository now creates a list, in this case of 6 studies which have been coded by us as speaking about the relationship between conversion and radicalization. For each of these studies, the repository provides the link to the original work. And if you ask for more information, a new page opens. And in this page, you can find detailed information about the specific publication, including the abstract, and most importantly, the key quote from the study, which tells us about the study's findings on the link between conversion and radicalization. In this case, that quote is taken from page 15 of the study. You can see that there's also some information on protective factors, and you can download or print that information and compare to the findings of other studies to create an overview of what we know about the link between conversion and radicalization. Okay, so what do these studies tell us? Maybe we can go to the next slide. Perfect. As said, there are only 6 studies in the repository on the link between conversion to Islam and violent extremism. You can see the list here again. At least 2 of them are very recent, from 2023, which indicates that more research is coming out on the topic. So if we look at the 2 studies on top of the list, then the findings indicate the following. We can go to the next slide. So first, we have here a study by Heerhout and Starling from the Netherlands, which finds that, and I quote, the Dutch converts in our study overall face a different relational embeddedness that is characterized much more by exclusion and alienation from dominant society, as well as their former social networks and communities, with no real sense of belonging to new in-groups except for Salafi and Islamist extremist groups that welcome them. If we look at another study on the next slide by Jones and Dawson, we can see here, and again I quote, that they find our initial inquiry into this post-conversion period suggests paying attention to the feelings of disappointment and frustrated expectations that most individuals experience after the religious conversion. And further, they argue that a pronounced sense of disappointment caused by the perceived gap between their idealized expectations and reality can foster the resentment, isolation, and quest for answers and significance commonly associated with radicalization. So overall, these 2 studies alone, without going into this much further, it's not a webinar on conversion after all, begin to create a picture which can provide valuable background information. For instance, for PCVE initiatives aimed at supporting converts. So I hope this example gives you a feeling for what the repository can potentially do and help you with, and we're going to discuss this more in detail in our panel. So finally then, a few words about the potential users of the repository. There are many, and we'll hear more about them in our panel in a moment. Maybe we can have the full slide. So one important purpose of the repository, we hope, will be that it can inform the design of new PCVE initiatives, and that it can help us to update and strengthen existing ones. The repository also promises to be beneficial for conducting evaluations of PCVE initiatives, in part because it can help us to identify a robust theory of change and relevant indicators. We'll hear more about that in a moment. It may also generally help to facilitate informed decision-making in PCV practice, and it might be used to update and inform training materials in the field. Finally, the repository may also help to facilitate dialogue between researchers and practitioners. It may be useful to strengthen a better and faster communication of research results. And it may also itself support research on risk and protective factors. As noted earlier, for researchers, it is also often difficult to efficiently collect and access relevant material. So the list of potential users of the repository then is long and really includes anyone working within the field of PCVE, policymakers, practitioners, evaluators, researchers. So ideally, then the repository provides an instrument which can benefit the PCVE community as a whole. So that's the hope, that's the ambition, and whether the repository lives up to these ambitions is what we will explore next in our panel. This is all from my side, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions later in the QA. But for now, back to Kai.
Stefan, thank you so much for that very clear and hands-on practical presentation of the repository, leading us through that example of how it can be used. I'm very glad to now welcome everyone to the second part of today's webinar, the panel discussion, where we have 3 presentations from colleagues and experts in the field. Teresa Silva joining us from Mid-Sweden University, Marzena Korachuk-Vash joining us from the Polish Platform for Homeland Security, and Vasilios Theophilopoulos from the Hellenic Police. The focus of the panel discussion will be on how can the repository strengthen an evidence-based approach to evaluation, initiative design, and policing, and what are the repository's advantages and limitations. We invite you as we go through the presentations to also think about possible uses of the repository in your work, areas that as you listen and also following from Stefan's presentation, you could identify as strengths and values. And we'd also like to ask you for your recommendations of possible further improvements or how the repository could be developed further to make it as relevant and as useful as possible for your work. But for now, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Teresa Silva, who will speak to us on the repository as a tool for evidence-based evaluation. Teresa, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Kai. I hope you can hear me. And, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'm Teresa, and I'm supposed to tell you about the importance of the repository and how it can serve you when you are doing evidence-based evaluation. Perhaps we can go to the first slide, Kai, please. Yes. So the good news that I have for you today is that if you are lucky enough, then you don't need to use the repository. And by this, I mean that if whatever initiative, program, action, intervention you are evaluating was developed properly with all the specifications of what the problem you want to solve is, the definition of the objectives, and the specification of the mechanisms of action, and what we call program theory, logic model, then you don't need to look at the evidence because the evidence is already being used to construct the intervention. And this is how we should work, and Marzena will tell you more about it after my presentation. She will present that if an initiative is developed as it should, then evaluation design starts at the same time you design the initiative. We normally say that evaluation starts when proper development starts. Can we go to the next slide, Kai, please? Yes. However, that is not what happens many times. Many times you need to do the process backwards because the program theory was not defined the moment you decide what actions or activities you wanted to include in your intervention. And by program theory, we mean the rational explanation of how the program works or the chain of causal effects, causal events that conform the engine, the core of the initiative. You may think of it like the cogs in a machine. For instance, and the example that I put here for you, why does democratic talks in schools among kids in 7th, 8th grade of segregate neighborhoods may be effective to decrease radicalization and the recruitment by extremist groups? You may answer in this case, well, because first, living in a segregated neighborhood exposes the kids to radicalized discourses of peers, parents, and others in the community. And we know the power of propaganda in shaping attitudes towards the outer group. And when the attitudes are positively reinforced in the peer group, then we know that it facilitates behavior like beating others or produce harm to others that are perceived as the enemies. So in order to cut these synergies, we develop a program. What we do is to, in this case of the democratic talks, is that we force the kids to listen to each other through these democratic talks. In fact, we force them to find reasoning arguments to defend their positions against the brainwash thinking induced by the propaganda, and find also pro-social ways to managing conflict, accepting that sometimes you have to live and you have to cooperate with people that have different ideas from yours. So in this case, when all this chain of factors was not well defined a priori during the design of the intervention, you will need to define it during the evaluation so that you are able to define what you need to evaluate. The repository will give you clues about risk factors working in each case so that you can define these indicators. For instance, in the case of the democratic talks, how much the kids interrupt each other before and after the intervention, how much they use inappropriate mechanisms of conflict solution, or how severe is their ethnophobic language and how much does it change during the intervention, with the intervention. So you define the indicators for measurement, and you also define who is the target of the evaluation. Are the kids, the peers, the parents, the teachers, the community in general? And consulting the evidence in the repository may also give you ideas for designing the evaluation. For example, using instruments, attitudes, for instance. It's a whole area within psychology with many methodological issues, and eventually you will be able to find articles that may indicate for you standardized skills that might be useful in your case if you want to evaluate the attitudes, radicalized attitudes. The literature will also indicate things as how a risk factor has a higher impact on this or on that people, or how it changes over time if no action is imposed to solve the problem. So doing evidence-based evaluation, it's a matter of searching the scientific literature to find the support to the interventions program theory so that you can define what needs to be measured, assessed, how, in whom, and when. Can we go to the third slide, Kay, please? So now what I want to bring for you, everything that I have been telling, it's very interesting, but how does this apply in practice? And I bring for you what I found tremendous illustrative of the problems that practitioners, in this case is law enforcement agents, have to face in their professional lives. In one of our internal discussions, and indeed through email, one of our law enforcement colleagues wrote this, and I am quoting him with his authorization. We know a lot of our potential violent foreign fighters or hate preachers. There is a follow-up. The way we do it could be subjected to evaluation. However, we also know that we know nothing. Almost all the attacks have been committed by people we didn't know in advance. So we are actually constantly looking for ways to be better informed. That implies strengthening the networks among the stakeholders and increasing the vigilance of communities. Now, what might be good indicators to define how to measure the increase of strengths of networks and, for instance, the increase of vigilance of communities, let alone the fact that individuals get radicalized behind their computers? How to increase the trust in the network approach and not being obstructed by this professional secrecy we all struggle with? How to evaluate the increased interest? What indicators should we determine in order to evaluate after a period of time whether the approach is useful or not? So these are the questions that practitioners have in their professional life. Can we go to the slide 4, please? Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So what I will do in this case to help in this situation is, first of all, sit and reflect, and seeing the first question that comes to my mind is, what is this brilliant colleague of ours transmitting, and what is he asking for? And I needed to disentangle his discourse in order to be able to give some advice. So in this first utterance, he's making a judgment about his work and indicates one of the points that could be evaluated, which could be done in different ways that I'm not going inside here in detail here, because that is not the point, but material in the repository may actually help. For example, looking at the literature about the progression or evolution of risk factors for radicalization, or about the progression for attitudes to how attitudes evolve to behavior. Can we go to the next slide, please, Kai? Thank you. So in this second group of utterances is very interesting, because what he does is that intuitively he offers an evaluative impression about their actions in the group, that their professional group. And he's transmitting that although he thinks their work is partially successful, it also partially fails, because there are many radicalized people they don't know. So in reality, he is intuitively doing what we preach that may be done employing an evidence-based approach. His reasoning is totally correct. It is basically reflecting the cycle of intervention development. We design, we implement, we evaluate, we improve. And in this case, I indicate one way the repository can help us, for example, finding the risk factors that should be kept under the radar that will help to better predict the behavior of radicalized individuals. Next slide, please, Kai. Now, and more related, yeah, the next one, please. The next one, yes, more related to questions, though, we go here first. More related to questions that what I propose is just an example for a question of the evaluation. If the problem is to define indicators that can measure the strengths of a network and the impact it has been on vigilance of communities, you can ask, for example, how many radicalized individuals and how much more do you know about them compared to a similar community that does not use or use a different type of policing network approach? And in this case, the repository may be useful to help you define what knowledge about radicalized individuals in terms of their risk factors it is important to have. And when he asks how to increase the trust in the network approach, dealing with the problem of secrecy, well, this is a question for developers. We are on that point of improvement, what we already done. So what you intend here is not to evaluate, but rather to propose solutions. Now, how to evaluate the increase in trust? In this case, clearly for evaluation, in this case, there is not only one answer, because you can, in reality, use multiple qualitative or quantitative methods, or both. If you are interested in details, we can go after in the Q&A session. And finally, what indicators should we determine in order to evaluate if the approach was efficient or not? Here, there are different aspects that can be measured, such as, for example, the number of individuals identified, how much you know about the identified individuals, how many and how much extremism and violent behaviors were you able to prevent with your way of working with this approach. These are some examples, but of course, only a detailed analysis of the objectives of the network approach can define what and how to measure and suggest an evaluation design. And here also the literature gatherer in the repository may suggest or give ideas. And just to give some examples about the use of the repository when you're doing evaluation, can you please, Kai, bring us to the next slide? This is just an example about methods and measurements. In this first example that I put here, the researchers, they create a comprehensive list of counter narratives disseminated by 3 regional organizations. So perhaps you can use this comprehensive list because there is already on there, and it's useful for you to do the evaluation in your place. Or perhaps, for example, they also quantify the public interest in these counter narratives using social media metrics. And this can be interesting for you as evaluators to go and say, let's see how these people work, what they have done. And I tell you as a researcher that many times what we do is copy and paste. And by this, I mean, is get inspired by what other colleagues have done. So in the second case, For example, one of the interesting things that I didn't thought that could be used, but again, because of the I am reading the scientific literature, this gives me examples in drawing on client case note data and interviews. This client case note data can be a kind of an interesting methodology for you to think on, okay, how do I have to do evaluation in this certain case? Can we go to the next slide, please? The next slide is about indicators. When you have to choose indicators, also the scientific literature and what is in the repository may be interesting. For example, in this case, it was about online radicalization, and the authors, the researchers, clearly look at certain variables that if it's a type of intervention that you are doing on there and you need to evaluate, then perhaps you want to evaluate exactly what they found that is extremely important in this case. Indicators or variables such as age, sex and gender, social networks, because these individuals, for example, are highly socially isolated. To look at the criminal story, since they also have an offending history, violent offending history of mental illness, and history of personality disorders that was found in this specific study as important to define, to characterize the individuals most at risk of violent behavior. And the next slide, please. I'm finishing. I think I'm almost on my time. For example, this is an example that I found of the causal chain that it might be helpful for you if you want to construct, if you have to construct that program theory that has not been defined a priori. Here, for example, it's an example where they say that radicalization facilitates the adoption of a conspiracy ideation rather than the other way around, rather than that the conspiracy ideation causes radicalization. So in this case, when you have to make your causal chain, then you know where to place these important factors for radicalization. And I finish here is everything that I have to say. I will be waiting for you in the Q&A. Thank you.
Teresa, thank you so much for your presentation and taking us through some practical ways in which the repository can be used to support evaluation in the PCVE and de-radicalization fields. For our next presenter in the panel discussion, we are joined by Marzena from the Polish Platform for Homeland Security, who will take us through how the repository can be used as a tool in evidence-based initiative design. Marzena, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kai. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Also, very big thank to all of you that you found the interest in our webinar. I'm very happy as I have a privilege to be the coordinator of the Indeed project. So for me, it's absolutely fantastic that so many people were interested in our webinar on Indeed repository. So as it was introduced already, I will tell you more how our repository can help you with the designing process of your initiative. Actually, I will refer also what Teresa and Stefan already have said about the repository, and especially what Teresa said that before presenting you how repository can help you with designing or supplementing evaluation, she mentioned something like, if you are lucky enough that you designed your initiative in the let's say the proper and professional way, and then you don't need a repository to help you with supplementing the evaluation or improving it, the assumptions of evaluation, that then you need to go correctly through the process of designing of the theory of change or the logic model of your initiative. And this is the case that the repository also can help you. And I will try to show you how, within the 10 minutes, but don't worry if you will not get all details, because we also offer as a Indeed Project Consortium the online self-paced courses that can be visited by you, and then you can get more details on the entire process of designing. So yes, so let's move to the next slide now, Kai. Thank you. So already was mentioned today by Stefan that indeed we are focused on evidence-based practice. Actually, we have our aim of our project is to help you as the practitioners and the policymakers to plan, to design the evidence-based evaluation and to conduct evaluation in the effective manner. But also what was mentioned, that we are focused on the entire designing process of evidence-based practice to be sure that since the start of the initiative, which was mentioned by Teresa, that it's actually the planning and designing of initiative is already the starting point, and that we aim to help policymakers and the practitioners to deal with this entire process to be sure that we are approaching it properly. So we mentioned evidence-based practice, and it was mentioned by Stefan that they are the three main components of evidence-based practice. It means that we are focused on the experience of practitioners and the policymakers, because working many years in the field, we know what is needed in the local communities in relation to prevention or countering of radicalization leading to violent extremism. We have to be focused on the values, on the needs of local environments, but there is a third component referring to the evidence, which is absolutely important for building and implementing evidence-based practice. However, we know from the practice, and also it was identified by us in our Indeed project, that this element is still quite complicated, or at least it seems to be very complicated, but we have a solution for you in the form of our repository that can help you to solve this problem, at least on the level of primary prevention and the process of designing of the evidence-based initiative on the primary prevention level. So what is very very important for the building the logic model of the initiative on the universal prevention, primary prevention level, is to know what kind of problem, what kind of threat we want to influence by our initiative. And very often we see from practice that we are very often focused on the threat, on the problem we want to solve in the local community. But this is not the end of this starting point. And this is not the end of the diagnosis that we should implement. The second very important step is to be also focused on the causes. Why the specific problem, why the specific threat is occurring in our environment. So we spoke many times with the practitioners in working on the Indeed project, and we know that this element of the diagnosis is the most is indicated very often as a very complicated or very expensive. This is why I will show you how we can harvest what is already in our repository on risk and the protective factors that can be utilized and can replace or supplement this diagnosis process and identifying not only the threats that can occur in our local environments, but also potential causes, risk factors, push factors that can lead to this specific situation occurring in our local environment. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Yes, this one. Why this diagnosis mentioned by me is so important? Because knowing what is happening or what we predict that can happen, because I'm saying that I will show you the example of, from the primary prevention level. So it means that from the prevention, that we want to deal with the problem that didn't occur yet, but we predict that it can occur in our local communities. So this knowing what can happen, what kind of problem, what kind of threat can occur in our local environment is important for us, because this this problem will be mirrored in our main aim of our designed initiative. And this is the element what we very often have and in our initiatives, and this element is not so complicated. But more problems we observe in the stage when we are talking about the causes of this predicted problem. Very often the initiatives, they are not really focused on the causes why the specific problem or threat can occur in our environment. And from the perspective of the prevention, is not very efficient, because of course we can design the initiative which will try to influence the problem diagnosed or the threat, but as long as we will be not influencing the causes why the situation is happening in our local environment, then this preventive activities will be not very efficient. So the next slide, please. I already mentioned a few times, and per purpose I'm repeating it, that I'm talking about the situation when we want to design, when we want to build the initiative on the primary prevention level. It means that we want to intervene before the problem or the security threat occurred in our local community, and then again showing you this important element of evidence-based practice, which is the best available evidence, which allows us to build not only tailor-made initiatives but also effective interventions. And our repository of risk and protective factors can help you in this process. Next slide, please. Yes, already Stefan showed you very briefly, of course, but nevertheless, you saw that what content is of our repository. So in the case I'm describing, we are very much focused on the risk factors, because as I mentioned already, those risk factors then they can be understood by us as push factors or even the potential causes of the radicalization leading to violent extremism in our local communities. So designing initiative which is focused on the radicalization in our local community, and bearing in mind that we also should be focused on the causes, potential causes that can lead to this radicalization in our local communities. So in this process of designing and mirroring the risk factors in our specific objective of our initiatives, in this process the repository can help. As you can see on the slide, in our repository you can search and identify the risk factors which can be understood or can be identified by you as a potential push factors, causes of radicalization. You can search them by population, by country, by ideological strain, which was already explained shortly by Stefan. So you can check whatever was already scientifically proven in the literature, in the studies, and you can select those specific risk factors which can be also understood at a specific in your local communities. It was mentioned that in the repository we have more than 250 studies checking which risk factors are specific for which kind of the population of the country in accordance to the specific ideological strain and other filters that are already in our repository. So sometimes it's not needed really to reinvent the wheel and to spend more money or designing and implementing separate diagnosis process, checking on the primary prevention level, what can be specifically understood as a push factors, risk factors, causes of radicalization that can occur in our local communities. But instead of this, we can, and this is absolutely allowed, to use the specific scientifically proven risk factors from legislature, in this case, which are saved and available in our repository of risk factors. The next slide, please. Yes, and exactly the same mechanism can be used when we are talking about the preventive, designing of planning the preventive activities and the protective factors. Because in our repository we also have protective factors which are scientifically proven and can be searched using the same mechanism which was already described. It means by the population, by the country, by the ideological strength. It means the protective factors that can be used by us and understood by us as policymakers and practitioners as those ones which were proven that they work to strengthen the resilience against the radicalization. So in the designing process of the initiative, those protective factors, they can and even should be mirrored in the preventive activities that we are planning to be implemented. It means that if they were scientifically proven, that we can predict that they will work. Of course, with the adjustment to our local community needs, but it's important to, but it's possible to do this by searching them and identifying them in our repository by the specific factors that characterize our local community. So then we will have two very important elements of the designing process: the starting point of building of theory of change and the logic model of our initiative. It means this formulating the main aim of our initiative and also formulating the specific objectives of our initiative, and planning and designing the preventive activities that they will allow us to achieve assumed objectives and then to achieve the assumed main aim of our initiative. So those three important elements can be supported by our indeed repository of risk and protective factors on the level of primary prevention, as it was already mentioned by me many times. So I'm ending my part of presentation. I know that this process is comprehensive, but as I mentioned, the more details will be available in our indeed self-paced trainings that will be available soon on the website. So I already now invite you to dive deeper in this entire process of planning and designing, evaluation, and also initiatives with the strong element of including the evidence from the science in it. So thank you, Kai, from my side, and I'm giving the floor back to you.
Marzena, thank you so much for taking us through from a practitioner of such extensive experience, a practical sharing of how to use the repository in designing evidence-based practice. And for those who have joined us through the duration of the webinar as it has gone on, just to remind that in the beginning, Stefan Kloss shared with us the presentation of what are the core components of evidence-based practice, bringing forward the importance of engaging with best available evidence, both from within our agencies and organizations and externally, engaging with professional experience, expertise, and judgment, the knowledge that is gained hands-on by practitioners within our own agencies and others within our own sector and others, and engaging with the needs, perspectives, values, and the context of communities and stakeholders that we're working with. Marzena, you've taken us through thoroughly the importance of engaging with evidence base when designing initiatives in the PVE, CVE, and de-radicalization field, and the way that the repository can be used to support that. To go one step further, we're now going to invite Vasilios, one of the partners in the Indeed project with the Hellenic Police, to take us through a very practical perspective on the repository as a tool for evidence-based policing. Vasilios, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us in your presentation today. Efaristo.
Parakalo, thank you so much, Kai. Very good morning from Athens, from sunny Athens, I could say. Thanks for the invitation to be part in this very interesting panel. In my presentation, I will give a more practical approach, about our repository. And mainly, we would like to focus on some practical questions and topics for the repository. Before starting my presentation, just to inform you that I'm a police officer. I serve in the Hellenic Police. My rank is a police colonel, and at the same time, I'm the head of the research team of the Hellenic Police in the framework of Indeed project. We have a big team, police officers who participate in this project. And the reason that I'm saying that is that in order to prepare this presentation, we had an internal discussion and meeting with our colleagues. They come from different police services from the Hellenic Police. And we tried to reply to these three main questions. The first one is it useful? We are part of a research project. We have an excellent idea to have this repository, but is it useful, for us as a police officers in order to design and to evaluate and to develop, an initiative? It could be a policy, it could be an ad hoc action. And if yes, what gap does it fill? This is the first question. The second really practical and interesting is how could practitioners use it in their work? And really, I'm very happy that I've noticed that we have many practitioners coming not only from Greece, but also from other countries. So perhaps it makes sense, to discuss a little bit more about, the use of practitioners, for our repository. And the third part of my presentation, I will focus on pathways to improvement and how we can have, it could be our next steps in the framework of the project and, of course, after the end of the project. And back, to the first question, if we can go to the next slide, Kai, thanks. The first thing that we need, and we see that it's very important, is that the repository fills a critical gap between researchers and practitioners. It was mentioned also before. There are many discussions at EU level, but also at national level, how we can work closer. Researchers, policymakers, practitioners. Always there is a kind of criticism from one side that, they cannot speak the same language as, we are practitioners. But for me, this is really a good example how we can work together, practitioners and researchers and policymakers, because the repository contains many empirical studies exploring the risk and protective factors associated with radicalization process. So you can have really the opportunity to explore many empirical studies on this topic. And I can give you also in my presentation, I will try to give you some practical examples, to explain what I would like to say for this. For instance, I received a phone call from a colleague from the Ministry of Migration in Greece, asking me, Vasilios, could you please tell me where I can find, some studies for migrants and possible links with radicalization and extremism? And say, go directly, to the repository. You can click the right. I explained, a little bit the procedure, and you can find, all the studies focused on this topic. And it was really helpful for him. He called me back saying, really thanks, because, I found extremely interesting material, for the topic. The second point is that a repository brings together scientific studies on the same phenomenon, but carried out in different countries, so we can have a better understanding holistically. And of course, we can deal with the problem, with the phenomenon in a more effective way. And also another point is that it covers, different forms of radicalization. It's not only, for Islamist radicalization, but we have also right wing, left wing. So you can find really material for any kind of form of radicalization. And of course, when you organize and summarize all these studies, you can easily develop, implement, and evaluate your prevention and of course, different initiatives or ad hoc actions concerning, how you can better intervene in a case study. Two more points. Next slide, please. For us also, it's important because it's a path, it's a step to go from theory to practice. Our repository contains advanced search capabilities. So, you can, as a practitioner, you can develop a tailor-made intervention, whether it is understanding of specific risk and protective factors. You can also identify what works in different communities, in different countries, as it was mentioned before by me. And of course, you can explore the outcomes, the findings of various approaches. And of course, the last point is that we save time. All the time, and this is also my personal experience as a practitioner, we don't have time, to search for more scientific material. So with a very wide range of criteria, it's easy for, the user to find exactly, what we need. And for instance, searching with filters and specific categories helps to find studies aimed at a specific audience or country or ideological background easily and quickly. So you don't waste time searching generally on the internet. Of course, you can find material available on the internet, but with our repository, you can go directly, and you can find all the available material. The second question, is also crucial for us to understand, if we can go, Kai, to the next slide, please, to understand how, could practitioners use our repository in our daily work. And the first really interesting and important idea is that we need, we can inform operational tactics and also we're using making evidence-based decision. For instance, the insights gleaned from the repository can help tailor police operations to the unique challenges presented by different forms of radicalization. At the same time, it is really helpful to make evidence-based decisions for our ad hoc actions, having again access to all these empirical studies. Another extremely important point is that we can really strengthen the engagement of our community and also to develop a kind of synergies and cooperation with other stakeholders as well. When, for instance, you can understand protective factors is really key to building community resilience. So as a practitioners, understanding, how we can build this community resilience. Also, we can learn, we can inspire in order, to have collaboration with other stakeholders, such as researchers, policymakers, and community organizations. And also, it's not something new when you work, in the PCV environment, that you can really better understand how you can promote the multi-agency approach to counter radicalization. Next slide, please. The third comment about the use of repository is concerning training and education. The repository serves as a pool of knowledge. So practitioners can recognize early warning signs of radicalization and also to understand the complexities of the phenomenon. And at the same time, and I will share with you my personal experience, it helps a lot, to develop focused material. For instance, in Greece, we decided to develop training material for the phenomenon of lone actors. At this time, we didn't have a real experience, dealing with this problem at national level. And we decided, to visit the repository. We found extremely interesting material for the phenomenon of lone actors, and we used the material in order to develop our training material. It would be the same for other, topics. If someone is interested in other kind of in other forms of radicalization, or in if there are other priorities, you can find really interesting material in order to develop also training material. And of course, always there is space for better and if we can go to the next slide, Kai, for the development, how we can improve the repository. And it's just some ideas coming from the team of the Hellenic Police. And of course, we can discuss with the panelists and also with you, with the participants. We need to further disseminate, the repository. We are thinking to organize something at national level in order to promote the repository and to inform our colleagues, not only in the police, but also to other relevant ministries. And I'm really happy that we've seen participants coming also from other ministries who participate, in the webinar. This is really a good start, but we try also to organize something at national level, and this is an advice also from other proposal for other colleagues that you can also have similar initiatives. But also we believe that perhaps we can integrate the repository with other existing databases. So we can enrich the repository, offering users a broader context and deeper insights into the studies it contains. And of course, another important point is we need to have regular updates. As Stefan mentioned in his presentation, that also in the framework of Indeed project, we have a number of updates, and this is really important because we should ensure these regular updates. It is really vital to maintaining its relevance and completeness. And we need to be really the most up to date, to have the most up-to-date information on risk and protective factors related to radicalization. And another proposal, and I think it's also interesting, is that perhaps, we can also add some other scientific studies in other EU languages. It will be helpful for some practitioners or policymakers or other stakeholders who, let's say, would like to have material also in their language. So I think it would be a good idea in the future if we can add some other studies, not only in English, but also in different languages. For instance, I know, based on my experience in Greece, that practitioners and other stakeholders prefer sometimes, to have also material in Greek. It's, let's say, easier to understand and to read it. Two next proposals. Also, I think that we need to improve the search functionality of the repository. That means that perhaps if we can have like advanced search filters or keyword search capabilities, it would be helpful for the users to navigate and retrieve relevant studies, and also I share with you our personal experience. I mean, we try to find some material for anti-Semitism and hate crime. Unfortunately, we didn't have, the opportunity to search with the existing filters. So we sent feedback to Stefan, and this is something that also it's really important because the procedure is very dynamic. So in case that you see that there is a way to improve, I mean, our work, please don't hesitate to contact the team. So we couldn't find, and when we contacted Stefan, he explained that there is material. I mean, there are studies with this topic in the repository, and he told us that in the next months, we will manage to have some, improvements also in the search functionality. And my last comment, and this is the end of my presentation, I will be very happy to have a discussion with you and to answer your questions. We believe that also it's important to have possibilities to interact. So we can incorporate some interactive features like visualization tools, user feedback mechanism, or discussion forums. We believe that with these possibilities, we can promote user engagement and knowledge sharing within the repository. So if we have, for instance, if we are able to exchange some ideas in a chat with some colleagues dealing with the same topic, it would be really very, very helpful and interesting at the same time. This is, my presentation, and I would like to thank the whole team of the Greek police who participated in this small exercise, small survey about our repository. And I will be more than happy to reply and to discuss with you if there are questions or comments. Back to you, Kai. Thanks again.
Vasilios, thank you so much. And thank you also to all of your colleagues in the Hellenic Police who took part in that practical exercise and discussion, engaging with the Indeed repository. And then thank you for sharing that with us so that all of us as a community of colleagues and practitioners joining in the webinar today can get that hands-on example of how the repository can be used, its practical strengths and values for the field, as well as some ideas on how it can be improved further as well. In fact, we are also inviting you as participants and engaging with smart hubs participating in the Indeed project from across Europe to share that feedback with us. This has been a first iteration of the development of the repository. Stefan has been working also throughout the project, continuously adding more studies and more data to the repository to increase its use for colleagues in the field. But we are already looking at what can be new frontiers, new developments, and how we can improve the repository further. And we will share a bit on that as well, while asking you to share with us your ideas and your recommendations. It's at this point that I'd like to ask my colleague Luci to share for the first time the feedback form in the chat. We've now had the presentation from Stefan and from Teresa, Marjana, and Vasilios. If you would like to give your feedback on the webinar to this point, you'd be welcome to. We're very much wanting to gain your insights as participants and as colleagues and practitioners in the field so that we can both see how today's webinar has been for you and work to improve future webinars in the Indeed Knowledge series. We're now at the point in this webinar where we turn to questions and answers. We'd like to invite you to write your questions in the chat space, and then I will be sharing them with our speakers today. We already have a number of excellent questions that have been raised, and I'm going to be sharing the first one now. It's by Angeliki Serafin, who raises a very important issue. She says, my primary concern is how can it be ensured in terms of practical guidelines and tools that the use of indicators such as mental health issues or past conflict with the law does not lead to stigmatization or discrimination and therefore further marginalization, so increasing radicalization. This is a very practical challenge we've seen in a number of countries where evidence has shown that the responses to those who are perceived as radical or those who may be stigmatized from being from certain groups has itself, in many instances, actually furthered radicalization and polarization or loss of trust in law enforcement and other actors. So that is the first question we have from Angeliki Serafim, and I'd like to turn that over to our speakers today. I'd also like to invite everyone joining in the chat space, add your thoughts and your experiences in this as well. We come together today as a community of practice, and we'd very much like to invite all of us to engage on these questions, sharing from your experiences, insights, and recommendations also. So how can we ensure that the use of indicators does not itself sometimes run the risk of leading to further stigmatization and discrimination, and what practical instruments or tools can support in that?
I can okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Take a first swing, and then I also see that Margina unmuted herself, so I think we all have something to say about that. It's a really important question. So we absolutely have to make sure that we do not design the wrong initiatives, which do not only not help, but actually cause more harm than good. I think what the repository specifically can help with, I hope, is to create a better understanding of what actually matters in radicalization processes and how they matter, so that we do not design initiatives on the basis of prejudice or on the basis of false assumptions or problematic misconceptions of what drives radicalization or violent extremism. So as you will also often find in the repository, is that many of the risk factors that are proposed are controversial in the scientific community, and for some risk factors, the findings will not support that this is an important factor. So it's important, I guess, to use this repository in order to distinguish between what matters for radicalization and what doesn't, and equally to better understand what actually helps to protect people from radicalization, to prevent those processes. So that's why also our review of protective factors is important. So this is maybe where this repository can come in. And we're also currently, and it's maybe a good moment to advertise that as well, we're currently in the process of developing a second repository. And that repository will look at preventive measures and how well they are working. So there we bring together a lot of studies, including many evaluations that have looked at what works and how it works. So looking at those studies in that second repository, which is currently under construction, I hope will also help us to learn from previous mistakes with some types of initiatives, and will help us learn from those initiatives that have been more successful, including at avoiding stigmatization and negative effects. So that would be my sort of first go at this question, Teresa and Margina.
Yeah, if I can go, Margina. That is a very interesting question that a colleague proposed, and I will take, for example, the case of mental health, and I will tell you that from my position as a researcher and as an academic, fighting with policymakers to understand what the work that we do, that many times is really badly interpreted. So what in my advice in this case is that you justify based on evidence exactly what the repository can help, why you are choosing the indicators that you choose. And I would advise you, for example, to start with questions to make a motivation of saying, I'm going to evaluate through this perspective, or I'm going to design this through this perspective with these indicators because, and you find the arguments, and your arguments is based on the evidence, we have this, and this. For example, in the case of mental health, I would start saying, not all people with mental health disorders are radicalized, and not all radicalized people have a mental health disorder. However, the research shows that if you have a mental, or if you are radicalized, you are more in risk of presenting a mental health disorder. Therefore, it is important for us in our evaluation that we do this, and this. We have done this, for example, in organized. I'm going out of what is the context of the radicalization, but in Sweden, just to explain to you what happened, in clear that saying, well, not all immigrants are criminals, right? But we have a problem inside of communities that are immigrants and that we have organized crime. So what happened is that the organized criminal groups infiltrated the neighborhoods because it's much more easy for them to settle in these neighborhoods, and because these organized criminal groups are immigrants. So it's not that all immigrants are criminals. But what happened was that the legislator in Sweden made now that it is possible for the police goes to specifically areas where there is more immigration, and discretionally just stop someone in the street and search them just because of how they look like. So this is how politicians sometimes takes what we are saying from research. But so my advice would be in this case that explain, justify why you use this, why you want to use these indicators, and justify them based on evidence.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Teresa. And Vasilos, Marzena, would either of you like to input as well? Vasilos,
Yes.
I see your hand is up also, and I know Marzena, you wanted to before.
Yes, I wanted just to add, that the build what was said already, or continue what was said by Stefan and Teresa. I agree. This is absolutely perfect question, and actually I knew that it can pop up. So I will add from my side what I already mentioned during my short presentation many times. That I said I described the case of using repository on the level of primary prevention. It means that repository can easily help you with the identification of the risk factors, understood as a push factors, causes of radicalization, and the protective factors, scientifically proven, but which are taken to our initiative to be built on, but on the level of this generic awareness. On the level of primary prevention, we are not talking about the specific individuals, maybe already radicalized. Rather, we are talking about the generic problem, threat we want to prevent. So it means that there is no actually risk of stigmatization, because we are not addressing our initiative to the specific individual. As I mentioned, that on the primary prevention level, we are designing the initiative which is addressed to the generic society, to the generic recipient group. And just underlining what Teresa and Stefan said, that in this case, using of repository is fully justified, because the risk factors and protective factors we want to use, in our initiative, they are deriving from the research, and it was proven that they work. So yes, so on the primary prevention is absolutely safe to use them, but it doesn't mean that on the level of secondary or tertiary prevention we cannot use them as well. We can, but then it would be needed also to go deeper into diagnosis mentioned by me, and really to check carefully if they will work or they can justify to be used in the specific case which we are identifying in our local community. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Marzena. And then we turn over to Vasilios.
Thank you, Guy, and really many thanks to Angeliki for her question. I mean, always there is a discussion, concerning indicators, and I would like also to share my experience back to my professional background as a practitioner. For instance, in Greece, we created a number of guides, pocket guides, containing indicators. And always there is a part, in this guide explaining how to use the indicators, how, the indicators should be used by the practitioners. Because one of the main fear is that we need to avoid the stigmatization of individuals or communities. So it is very clear when we send, this material to practitioners, explaining how they have to use it as well. Of course, and the main, idea is that when we discuss about indicators, we say that there are no evidences. So this is something completely different. We have the indicators and we have evidence, and indicators are not evidences. So they have to know all, colleagues dealing with this specific, challenge that how to use any kind of list of indicators. And when we have, something practical, as a tangible result, we need to have, evidence or as it was mentioned by Marcena, for instance, to have studies based, on evidence, empirical studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, Marzena, Teresa, and Vasilios. I hope, Angeliki, that helped to bring different perspectives and some possible answers to addressing your question. I do want to just flag, because Marzena, you had mentioned that with the repository, it's not a risk because it looks at general. I think it is still very important to have that safety and care note, that it's not only about how something might be in the repository or in a study, there's then when someone connects with that and takes that to practice. And when a practitioner or policymaker sees a reference to mental health or sees a possible population group, that can then feed into existing prejudices or bias, and it can feed into stigmatization. So it's a very important point to have raised, Angeliki. Thank you for that. Connecting with that, it would also be important to share with everyone that within the Indeed project, we have given a priority and very deep focus to addressing what we call GELSA: gender, ethical, legal, and social aspects of every single aspect of the work that's being done, of evidence-based evaluation, of evidence-based initiative design, policy making and practice, the repository, the Indeed model and tool, the trainings and online courses. And I share this because the GELSA lens, gender, ethical, legal, and societal aspects, are ones that we can also take into our practice, in our work as evaluators, in our work as practitioners. Together with that, two other key concepts. One is PSEH, preventing sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, which is important for every agency to have incorporated into their work, and cultural competency, which can address some of the risks of possible stigmatization, but it's always something we need to engage with. Also on indicators, Stefan has mentioned the existing repository on studies of risk and protective factors, and also the developing repository looking at initiatives in the field and the practice and what works and how. And we've also been discussing recently in some Indeed meetings about developing a repository of evaluation approaches, methodologies, and practices, which could include a repository of indicators, and to look at what are different types of indicators and how can they be developed. This is not part of the current scope of the project, but it points to some of the future possibilities of how this repository could be developed further. Angeliki, also you asked the question of which languages will the self-paced online course be provided in. It will be provided in 10 languages, including English, Spanish, Greek, German, Romanian, many others. And that list will be available, and we'll be announcing the online courses, which are designed for practitioners, experts, evaluators to take at their own pace around across Europe and around the world. We have another question from Julian Kanitz, and I'm just going up to this now on the chat to try and find it. Julian mentions, or Juliana, that she has done a quick check, and it resulted in study population containing data on everybody but kids under the age of 18 years. And I think, Stefan, you'll be able to answer very practically why the limit was at that adult population age. But Juliana goes on to point out that kids of foreign fighters are mostly smaller than that. How would you recommend I search for studies concerning children, foreign fighters, or other extremists?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So we do have a category in the repository. If you go to the study population that says young people, I think this is the one you're referring to. This is people aged 18 to 35. There is also a category called adolescents. So that is people below the age of 18. And I think you will find the studies that you're looking for if you search for that group. So it is included in the repository.
Thanks, Stefan. So maybe we can take a look at it ourselves and see if we include also the age range for it. That might help people who are coming to it from different contexts as well to see that's there. We have another question from E. Marino. Also, I'd like to say to everyone, my apologies for any mispronunciations of any names. We have a question. I would like to ask, what are the criteria of selection of the empirical studies included in the repository? Methodology, sampling. Can you share with us any information on the criteria for how these studies have been selected for inclusion in the repository?
All right, I think that's also a question for me. Very briefly, because there's not so much time left, we do have a document on our website that in more detail describes what the process is. But basically, we include all studies that we think make an important empirical contribution. It's not restricted to quantitative studies. We also include qualitative studies, really a range. And what is important to us, again, is that there is a significant empirical contribution in that paper. And we systematically go through a number of journals and websites and search engines to find studies. And the studies that we do not include are, for instance, theoretical discussions that go beyond the empirical analysis.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stefan. And that takes us right to the time of today's webinar. We've had some superb presentations from Stefan, Teresa, Marjana, and Vasilios. Thank you so much for sharing with us this important development and step forward for the field. Speaking for all of our partners and colleagues from the Indeed project, we really hope that this tool that has been developed will be useful for us as colleagues and practitioners working to address preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization across Europe and more widely. I would like to take just a moment for those who are still with us to share with you some of the upcoming events in the Indeed project. I'd also like to let you know that the feedback form, which we have asked for you to provide your feedback on today's webinars, it is shared in the chat. Luci, if you could please share it again so people can have access to it. Thank you very much. We will also be sending it out to you by email after this webinar and sharing with you information on upcoming events, an invitation to subscribe to the Indeed newsletter if you haven't done so previously, and also letting you know about the next stages and developments within the project. But for the moment, just to be able to share with you visually while we are here together, some of the upcoming events and activities. One, we have the homepage for the Indeed project. Here we provide all of the updates, all of the new developments in the project. You can find information on the smart hubs, which are being implemented across Europe, the toolkit, which includes the online evaluation tool, a step-by-step tool to help you see how to develop and plan your evidence-based evaluation. We have a wide range of resources, including the online repository, as well as webinars, podcasts, video interviews, which will be added in the coming weeks and months, creating a very significant knowledge repository for the field. We will also be sharing with you shortly information on the next Indeed forum, and you can see the videos from last year's forum from November of 2023 and events where we will share news on upcoming trainings across Europe. Our next major event to share with you is a training of trainers, which will take place in Cluj-Napoca, Romania from April 22nd to 25th this month. This will support practitioners and trainers in the field who will then be able to provide cascade trainings. We're also creating a training support package and training manuals that will be available in 10 languages so that you can engage with the resources and materials that have been developed by Indeed and either provide the Indeed trainings as they have been created or pick and choose, selecting modules from the Indeed trainings, which you can integrate into already existing trainings or draw upon the materials to tailor trainings for your specific needs and context and the stakeholders you're working with. We also have an entire suite of knowledge products, including learning notes, webinars, video interviews, and podcasts, which will come out through the coming months, engaging with practitioners, experts, evaluators, and colleagues working in the field from across Europe and around the world. We will have another upcoming webinar on May 23rd from on PCVE, the M&E Center of Excellence of the International Center for Counterterrorism. And unfortunately, while I don't have a slide in this pack to share with you yet, I'd like to take the opportunity to announce also the next Indeed webinar on May 20th, which we will promote widely through the newsletter on the website and all our social media channels. That will be a critical webinar presenting the Indeed model and tool and some of the core results of the project and how you can engage with them. I'd also like to take the opportunity once more to share with you about the second Indeed International Forum for Policymakers, Practitioners, and Experts on the Field from Evidence to Practice towards Improved Policy and Practice, which will take place in September 2024. The dates are still being confirmed, but we do expect that it will happen in the week of September 11th and 12th, and we will be sending out invitations to practitioners, agencies, experts, and organizations in the field because we would like to develop this forum in collaboration, inviting your institutions, law enforcement agencies, universities, think tanks, and organizations in the field to be partners so that this will be a truly collaborative forum to bring together practitioners, evaluators, policymakers, and experts from within our own countries and across Europe to advance the practice of evidence-based evaluation, evidence-based practice, and evidence-based policy making. There's much more to share, but we are already at time for today's webinar. I would like to invite you once again, please do sign up for the Indeed newsletter, where our wonderful colleagues from Deep Blue help to communicate information on all that is happening within the project. We'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again at the next Indeed webinars and upcoming events in the project. Thank you very much.